Hi, and welcome back to Bugs in My Brain. After doing an Understanding Shigaraki video, I thought, why not let's just get into it with my other favorite anime bastard of all time, and one that's more well-known and more well-liked, Lawliet. Yay, that is his last name, and it's not Lawliet. I thought for 2 years that it was, until, I was graced with the reality that if you go to the Death Note wiki and you look on his bio, the way that Romanji spells out his name, that is how it's pronounced. At a first glance, it might seem easier to justify L than it is to justify Shigaraki, because systematically L is seen as being like this force of justice in Death Note. I'd argue it's kind of harder to be empathetic with L than it is for Shigaraki, because he has an apathetic nature, lacks remorse for involving innocent people, innocent lives in his cases, and this guy's like a freaking millionaire or a billionaire or something who only pursues criminal investigations of his own personal interest or of financial merit. So, eat the rich, L included. L is a rather tragic character, and I'm gonna pull some various sources from, Death Note's original content, and then the novel, the novel L Changed the World, written by M. This is the book that I'm going to be using, and this book is technically not canon. It's a spin-off where spoilers are never safe on my channel. L lives, except he still dies but it covers a lot of interesting topics on L's character that we don't get to see in the original Death Note canon. And I'm going to be using these sources to, look at what has shaped L to become this cold, calculated, ominous person that we know and love him as. It's known that L is an orphan, and there isn't much information about L and his biological parents before he's adopted by Watari when he's 8 years old. So some of what I say could just be mere speculation, but I do think that the shift from his life before to being adopted by Watari and going to Uemi's house has a lot to do with his, schizoid nature. When L shows up to Uemi's, he's shown becoming violent with the other kids that are in Uemi's house because they all try to hug him. And when I say violent, I don't mean he's, being crazy, but he does kick down every single one of the kids. And also, Watari gifts L with a padded cell. This and other traits L has is often played off as some weird joke to show how weird and odd he is. But his introduction to Uemi's is already telling me, at least, that L has experienced some kind of trauma that has made him incredibly untrusting, withdrawn, and has maybe, he has unregulated behaviors as a child that could indicate trauma disorder in childhood. L is definitely autistic coded, and some of this may be parts of his autism, such as the social isolation and touch aversion, but I believe that there is more to that. L, at one point he gets grabbed by Aizawa in the manga and the anime. The anime makes it a little bit more clear. And this is one of the very rare moments that we see distress from L. He's all shivering, and he's still talking really calmly, but you can tell that Elle's a little shaken up by that. And I think that this ties back to that childhood aversion I talked about, when he's thrashing kids for trying to give him a hug. Elle's upbringing may seem like he was just, some ultra-intelligent kid who was allowed to flourish within his potential, but Watari and Uemi's house have been revealed in the source material to be abusive and instilling a grind culture in these intelligent children, pushing them with so much pressure that one of them even takes their own life. And one of the other ones becomes a serial killer known as Beyond Birthday, who we will meet in the VB murder cases, but I'm not using a lot of the material from that book right now. L's was, one of the first major successes of Watari's attempts to find an intelligent world influencer. And with how incredible L's abilities are, this raised the stakes for Uemi's house exponentially. But L, while now responsible for this corruption too, we get a little bit of that too, he was not immune to these harsh conditions. While sheltered and pampered by Watari, who caters to L's needs, wasn't raised to be human. And he did not have a childhood. Elle, in my opinion, was deprived of any healthy growth and normalcy in the pursuit of becoming the world's greatest detective. Elle has a few disadvantages going for him that are responsible for his cold persona. One, that he's expected to be this world-saving source of justice since childhood. And two, outside of this, Elle isn't only smart in a practical or an academic sense, but Elle has a very strong interpersonal intelligence. He fucking can read people just like that. He's very intelligent. And so his unpaired intelligence mixed in with, his autistic traits or whatever you want to call it that make him look creepy and unapproachable. I don't know if Elle was deprived of building connections as a child or if he simply didn't want to have them. But either way, Elle has been separated from humanity. Elle admits that he himself is this lying monster, right? We all know the monster speech all over fucking TikTok. So Elle is stuck in this weird social purgatory where the average human being is not going to understand Elle because he's just very intelligent and his worldviews and experiences are so much different because of that. And those who might understand Elle are very intelligent, very cunning, and will use that eventually against him, betray him, maybe even try to take his title. With this nice intro of information, I would like to bring this back and beg the ultimate question about Elle. Is Elle this heartless monster who has no desire for connection? But it's simply, Elle is misunderstood. So I'll preface this and say that a lot of the takes that I have right here are my own opinions and observations from the perspective of a very passionate Elle fan for about 5 years now. So these can really just be brushed off as headcanons if you don't like them. Elle is someone whose humanity as a character is greatly overlooked in the source material and elsewhere. A lot of this, a lot of Elle's true self is pure speculation from anyone, really. So take this with a grain of salt. This is just a theory. I don't believe Elle is as heartless as he or the other characters in the show want you to believe. He is faced with the most gruesome details about criminal cases, which has desensitized Elle from the tragedies at hand, mixed with his weird social demeanor. This leads to a lot of misunderstandings about Elle's approach to a case. So Elle is desensitized to all these horrible things, right? And in the grand scheme of things, yes, I know Elle does this as a game. But if we're talking about justice and genuine justice, Elle gets the job done. He gets results. And ultimately prevents more disasters leading up hand because he tackles these cases in such an intricate way that prevent the murderer or whoever from getting away any longer. So I think a lot of Elle's actions, while they're definitely corrupt and indicative of the reality of the justice system that we live in today, I believe that Elle is acting out of logic, and it makes sense. And I think in comparison to, all the horrible things that these murderers do, Elle is putting an end to them. And he is desensitized, so actions like putting a death row inmate on live television to get murdered by Kira doesn't go in Elle's head as oh, maybe we shouldn't do this, maybe I'll get canceled for this. Elle doesn't care. Elle's rich, he can do what he wants. At the same time, I think Elle has a lot of logic behind his tactics. Elle changed the world. There is a scene that's exclusive to the novel, and it's not in the movie adaptation, so if you really want to get the goodies, read the book, don't watch the movie. Do watch the movie, it's good. There's a scene where Elle crashes out, and he's chasing Maki, who is a girl that he meets in the show that he has this, brother-sister kind of bond with, and he is unable to reach Maki. He falls on the ground, and he starts punching the ground. I'm shit you not, this is real Elle content from a spin-off that's not canon, but this leads the book to explaining through all of Elle's attempts through being calculated and nonchalant in this cold detective that it's really him suppressing this very strong hurt inside of him. The book then explains that much of Elle's weird traits are a coping mechanism for all of this. He's burdened by the tragedies that he's seen as a detective so much that he hunches, and it's he's literally carrying the weight of all the victims. The book also implies that Elle eats sweets and sugar and all that as another way to cope with all the tragedies that he's constantly seeing. He's constantly being exposed to horrific, violent, gruesome events, and so every bite he must take has to be coated with sugar in order to, add a little sweetness in there, a little sweetness to his life. The title of the greatest detective in the world is not a light one, which goes back to before, that Watari's encouragement to make sure El was, that he reigned true as the most successful and intelligent force of justice ever, turned El into a walking computer, separate from a mere calming experience of experiencing emotions. Now, what Death Note says about intelligence is actually kind of unhealthy and ableist at worst. If you look at how this show, and sometimes its community, emphasizes how intelligence equals superiority, and that intelligence is to not feel. If you're actually smart or have common sense, you know that no matter how gifted or strong you are in some way, you gotta take care of yourself. But Death Note, El's character more specifically, shows that feelings are to be sacrificed for the sake of intelligence. A rhetoric that El expresses to Chief Yagami, not exactly in the sense of intelligence, but incompetence. This is why more emotionally expressive characters such as Matsuda or Misa are considered intellectually inferior to the rest of the cast. But El, while so stoic and seemingly unfeeling, is distracting himself from his own feelings. You could argue that this is why he doesn't sleep. And then this is also why he's always working on cases, right? I theorize that El does this because he doesn't like to live in his own head, despite how much he really does. We always see him doing these inner monologues. What I mean is that he has to distract himself so much that he never has to process the logic of his human heart, which is a very daunting thing for El, given all the evil things that he's done. I believe El's monster speech can be interpreted as it's easier for El to assume that he's this horrible person, much like the culprits that he catches, than to look at himself as a nuanced, hurt, and flawed human, and to see himself with compassion. El doesn't believe that he deserves, or not necessarily doesn't deserve, but he doesn't think sympathy is necessary for him. He himself just accepts, he's this bastard who utilizes lying and manipulation, not only for his cases, but when he's socializing with just about anybody. To be sympathized with is indicative of a hurt person with emotions. El's upbringing has brought him up to believe that he's above this, even when he's struggling internally very, very harshly. And this comes to a big topic I wanted to talk about: the bells. In episode 25, El tells Light about him hearing bells. And there's a lot to talk about, a lot of things I'm going to say. I can already hear the arguments, that El is just being a fuckhead, and that he was trying to get this reaction out of Light. And yes, I believe that as the case, yes, El buffing up some of his dialogue to get a reaction out of Light, but I don't believe that the bells in general are a whole lie. The bells are played in the beginning of episode 25, and they're also played while he is dying. And sure, this could be chalked up to artistic direction. El expresses that these bells are unusually loud today, and that he finds them very distracting. I'm not a clinical psychologist, and El's exact issue is hard to really pinpoint. This scene made me ask myself, does El have a mood disorder? And excuse me while I pull this out my ass, but recall El having 2 months of depression. Here comes again. He's just doing that to piss off Light. Yes, in the manga, when he is amping up his depression while he's talking to Light and Misa in the room, yes, he's saying a lot to get on Light's nerves. That's how El works. Are you really telling me that El is motivated enough to fake 2 months of depression? He's seemingly doing nothing. We get this whole time skip. Even the manga and the show knows that without El being at his peak point, the show's not going to be interesting. El's mannerisms are extracted from so many neurodivergent disorders, such as autism, OCD, and even a little bit of mania to an extent, which I will get into in a bit. The writers want us to know that he's weird and he's kooky. Bringing it back to the bells, what El is experiencing here is a reoccurrent auditory hallucination. But I proposed a mood disorder instead of schizophrenia because El is obviously not delusional in the scene. But for a person with bipolar 1 usually, they experience psychotic symptoms and even psychosis when they're symptoms are on a rise. One of the common triggers for these symptoms is stress. And Change the World, already tells us Elle holds a lot of stress and pressure, even if he doesn't really express that. And in the bell scene, the rain rooftop rain scene, Elle says that the bells are unusually loud. What is his source for stress? Knowing that he's about to die? And the whole state of the case, as where it was at that point, was pretty fucked. These bells could also indicate a suppressed trauma disorder. Other reasons Elle might have bipolar disorder includes the insomnia, daring, risk-taking behaviors. And a lot of these symptoms that I'm saying are gonna probably be like, oh, well, that makes sense because he's a detective. But Elle's different for a lot of reasons. Preoccupations with trusting people in his mind, where it almost sounds paranoid to someone, right? It sounds paranoid if I said, I don't trust people because everybody's manipulative and cunning and is going to lie to me. When somebody normally says that to you, you're probably going to be like, oh, you're a little paranoid. But for Elle, it's fine because it's covered up by this logic mask of intellect to make it seem fine. And also the depression, which is very real for Elle's character. And I want to point out, in the beginning of Death Note, we see Elle, he's really motivated, very confident and zippy. And then when you get past the Yotsuba arc, Elle is chair-bound a lot of the time and kind of gloomy. It's very depressive. I know, you might be thinking, how could Elle possibly have bipolar disorder when he's so calm? And to that I say, it's harmful to assume that every person with bipolar disorder is, explosive and totally unmanageable. And this disorder can look very different for people depending on who has it and, their life experiences. I'm not saying Elle for sure has bipolar disorder. I do think that, this could be explained through a lot of different things. Maybe of even trauma. That happens, as people with trauma, they have a reoccurring hallucination or something of that realm because of how intensive the experience was. But I just wanted to talk about that. Just wanted to throw my ideas in there. Why is Elle so distant? Simply, it's a mix of trauma, conditioning, and Elle's general worldview. Elle's faced with Light, who's, somebody of equal footing intellectually, and the writers state Elle didn't view him as a friend and thought of him very negatively, which this stirs up a lot of debate among the Lawliet. Is this ship pronounced Lowlight? Because I think that's the only right way to say it, because with the combination of Light and Elle's last name, which is pronounced Low, by the way, so it's Elle's last name and the ship are the same pronunciation. But to me, I do think that Elle saw a potential friend in Light, and so perhaps he's even grieving this friend that he could have had. But he knows better that this person's eventually going to fuck him over, which brings me back to what I said before. Elle is in this social purgatory. He doesn't have friends because anybody who's like him and would understand him are going to do what Elle does, which is lie and betray. Elle does desire connection. He's so far removed from trusting that anybody could ever possibly understand him. His relationship with Watari and Maki show that he does enjoy, familial bonds to some extent. And he also mimics friendship with Light, even though we know how that went. He even may desire romance, but avoids its complications. Because you can date Elle in this video game called Death Note: The Spiraling Trap. There's English emulators, so go play it, it's fun. And there's this little minigame where you can date Elle, but you have to build trust in order to eventually get him to love you. There's also this really funny moment in the novel where Elle is just, for a moment, mesmerized by this waitress who at a maid cafe who calls him master. Romance, however, is so far out of Elle's league that he doesn't see himself as somebody who is lovable or who could reciprocate the feelings of love. I really want to save the romance discussion for a future video, so I'm going to leave it at that. Basically, to wrap this up, I really didn't cover a lot of what I wanted to say. Elle is greatly misunderstood. Elle lives his life as this alienated person from the rest of the world, but a lot of that alienation has come from his upbringing. A lot of what I'm talking about here is really just hard to cover for the fact that we don't know what L's life before Whammy's house was. We don't know what great traumas he's faced. Why the bells really exist. I always thought it was like a funeral bell for his parents. That's what the beginning of episode 25 was kind of trying to allude to, I think. But we don't know his connection with his parents and how that impacted all of this, right? So it's really hard to say. And this whole video is pretty much entirely speculation, but I hope that you enjoyed my takes, and I hope that you enjoyed my ramble. And if you want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe if you would like to. And I'll cover more about L or Shigaraki, or I also want to start talking about some other interests of mine, such as Monster High. And if you have any ideas, anything you want me to cover or analyze or anything, comment below what you'd like to see, and maybe I will consider. Anyway, thank you, and goodbye.